Theara Ward. I'm a former dancer of Dance Theater of Harlem. I danced with the company for 11 years. I am presently a program associate, and I've been in that position for 4 years. I work with the arts education and outreach, but I also do the supplemental studies for the school and for summer intensive. Well, the Dance Theater of Harlem was founded by Arthur Mitchell and Carl Shook. It's important to know that Arthur Mitchell was the first African-American male dancer to integrate the New York City Ballet in 1955. He was a principal dancer. He danced with the company for about 15 years. He was on his way to Brazil to work with the company there, and he heard the news of the death of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And as he was in transit, he wondered, why do I go to Brazil to do what I can do here in the United States? So he came back and he started working with children here in Harlem. They had classes at the Church of the Masters, the Harlem School of the Arts, and then eventually they got someone found an old garage here on 152nd Street, where we are right now, and transformed it into a dance studio. He said that he started out with 30 children and 2 dancers, and over a period of about 3 months, it multiplied to 200 dancers, and then it multiplied to close to 800 dancers. Eventually, as they began to get more funding, they got a challenge grant, and they had to create a performing company. And he often said that the company, the young people weren't ready, but he had to push them. And eventually, he ends up with a professional dance company that breaks down all kinds of barriers.
To interest young people in the dance, Mitchell has developed a program that presents an introduction to ballet, followed by several performances in costume.
Now, it's really important to understand that Dance Theater of Harlem came about at the end of the Black Power movement, well, in the middle of the Black Power movement, the end of the Civil Rights movement, and there was a fallacy that people of color could not do ballet. It's a European art form, so people felt that people of African descent could not do it because their body types weren't appropriate, and a host of other reasons. But Mr. Mitchell proved them wrong, and he brought what he learned internationally and under the tutelage of George Balanchine to Harlem and taught some of the most amazing dancers the world has ever seen. Virginia Johnson, who was a charter member with Dance Theater of Harlem, is one of them. She is now the artistic director.
So my name is Virginia Johnson, and I'm the artistic director of Dance Theater of Harlem. But I'm also a founding member. I came to Dance Theater of Harlem in actually 1968. I was a student from Washington, D.C. I was at NYU, and I was looking for a place to take ballet class. And someone told me that Arthur Mitchell was teaching ballet in Harlem on Saturdays, and I should go up and see what was happening. And I came up and found out that he was starting a company. So I took a leave of absence from NYU and became a member of Dance Theater of Harlem in 1969. So Dance Theater of Harlem had the great advantage of being the brainchild of Arthur Mitchell. You know, Arthur Mitchell was the first African-American to be a permanent member of an American ballet company, and that was New York City Ballet. And New York City Ballet was run by George Balanchine, who was probably the greatest ballet genius of the 20th century. And George Balanchine came to America from Russia to create a ballet company that he thought would express what America was about. His original idea for New York City Ballet was to have 6 black dancers and 6 white dancers. And when he came here, he found out that that wasn't doable in America. But he saw in Arthur Mitchell that vision of what we as a people can bring to this art form. And so he was a great champion of Arthur Mitchell. He made him a principal dancer. He created many ballets on Arthur Mitchell as a soloist and as a principal dancer, and really challenged people's ideas about what ballet should look like. So when Arthur Mitchell was in the prime of his career, he was asked by the US government to start a ballet company in Brazil because we were trying to build stronger relations. And So Arthur Mitchell was going back and forth between Rio de Janeiro and New York, starting this ballet company, doing choreography, creating something, because he was getting ready for the next phase of his career. And he was on his way to the airport on April 4th, 1968, which of course is the day that Dr. King was assassinated. And that stopped him in his tracks. He said, why am I going off to some foreign country and doing something for some other people when there's so much work to be done at home? He was a great admirer of Dr. King, as we all were, but he wondered, what can I do? I'm a ballet dancer. And he figured that, when you looked around Harlem in the 1960s, and the 1970s, and the 1980s, what was happening? It was a part of the city that was completely forgotten, completely overlooked. It was part of the city that you didn't want to think about. The lives of the young people, there was no future, there was no hope. The buildings, the roads, everything, it was a disaster. And so he said, let me start a ballet school in Harlem. Not because I want to turn out ballet dancers, but because I want to give these young people a better chance in life. I want to give them the skills that they need to succeed in life. And by that he meant, it is a tremendously difficult art form, this classical ballet. It requires concentration, it requires focus, it requires discipline and self-discipline. But the most valuable thing to me is that it requires perseverance. You've got to go in there every day and do something that's impossible, and have people telling you that it doesn't look right, and you have to believe in yourself, and you have to believe in doing it. And by that, you gain the strength and the capacity and the ability to master this art form. And that's what Arthur Mitchell wanted to bring to these young people in Harlem who didn't have exposure to that kind of long view of what their life could be if they invested themselves in it. So Dance Theater of Harlem started as a school. And so when I came up here in 1968, we were located down at Harlem School of the Arts, in the basement of the Church of St. James Presbyterian Church, as a school where Arthur Mitchell was changing the lives of these young people. But he realized that these young people actually needed something to aspire to, something to look up to. And he thought, oh, I'll make a company. So that's how I got started. I think that the thing about Dance Theater of Harlem that is most significant is that it does change people's minds. It does give people inspiration, it does give people joy, but it also makes them ask questions. It makes them look at the world that they think is set and is defined and has got to be the way it is, and know that, yes, it is possible to change.
Others include Lydia Barca, she's now China White, but Melva Murray White, Gail McKinney, Sheila Rohan, Walter Raines, Paul Russell came through the company. Even Hinton Battle came through the company. Many, many dancers of color have come through Dance Theater of Harlem to get a classical training foundation. Dance Theater of Harlem was known for its eclectic repertoire because once again, the repertoire reflected who these people were. They were of African descent, but really Dance Theater of Harlem has always been multiracial, but people of African descent with stories and ballets from the African diaspora with stories from the European traditions. And that's what made it so beautiful to see this mixture of European and American traditions on the stage at one time. What was also very significant is Dance Theater of Harlem is a disruptive innovation in regard to dance apparel. In ballet classes, people normally wear pink tights. Well, why do they wear pink tights? Because the pink tights match their skin tone or their clothes to create a uniform look. But somewhere between the work of Arthur Mitchell, there was a dancer by the name of Yancey Stevenson who used to wear brown tights over her pink tights, and Zelda Wynn, who is known to be one of the first African-American fashion designers to have her own atelier or workshop store in the Broadway district. Somewhere in that mix of people began to look and say, the line is cut off. It's not a complete line. So they began to experiment and eventually came up with about 8 different dye tones for all of the different complexions of the dancers in the company. And they would dye their shoes to match their tights. In addition to the flesh tone tights and point shoes, another very interesting thing that Dance Theater of Harlem did in the early 70s was to wear afros. The women wore afros. I don't think you would see the afros so quickly at Lincoln Center, but they did dance around the world with these afros, and it was their way of claiming their cultural identity and making a statement and still maintaining a high level of artistic excellence. Dance Theater of Harlem went through different evolutions in its repertoire, but it was mainly known for the way that it interpreted the George Balanchine repertoire. And it's so interesting, 48 years later, to hear stories of George Balanchine, and we've heard the same stories from Arthur Mitchell, and we just had those stories, and we were told those stories uptown, while the people downtown heard the same stories. And there was a season also where Dance Theater of Harlem did theatrical ballets, ballets like Equus and Streetcar Named Desire, Frankie and Johnny, Fancy Free, Scheherazade. And some of those ballets made way and prepared the company for Second Act Swan Lake, Raymonda, Paradis, and event Firebird. Dance Theater of Harlem has its own version of Firebird. And eventually Dance Theater of Harlem went on to do a full-length ballet, Giselle, but we called it Creole Giselle. Why did we call it Creole Giselle? Well, after extensive research, Arthur Mitchell and Carl Michel, the costume and set designer, discovered that there was a free people of color community in Louisiana, in antebellum Louisiana, that matched the time frame that Giselle was created in Austria. Well, the story was set in Austria, but the ballet was actually created with the Paris Opera in France. And so rather than try to put us in Austria, Mr. Mitchell thought it was fitting that the set be based in Louisiana. So therefore the climate, the costumes, the decor, the set, everything had to change to reflect the change in locale. And it was an exciting journey. I happened to be here for that. And I asked Mr. Mitchell when he came in the room, and he said, "Dancers, we're gonna do Giselle," and we all looked dumbfounded. But, and then he explained that he wanted us to do Giselle based in the Bayou, and I raised my hand, "Mr. Mitchell, why are we doing Giselle in the Bayou?" And he said, "Well, why don't you do some research and find out and tell me why?" And I did, and I don't have any regrets. It was one of the most exciting times to be at Dance Theater of Harlem. The Creole Giselle ended up winning a Laurence Olivier Award for Outstanding Excellence in Television and Theater. So there was a point in 2004 where the company had to disband, and there were many hopes that were put on hold because this was an area where people could come and dance ballet that were of color. And so for 8 years, the company was on a hiatus to get a more secure footing financially. And the company came back in 2012. So we're excited that this company is almost 5 years old, that's returning, and that they're plowing through and making their way. And they're doing a good job. They're doing good work. And the company is smaller, but it's finding its voice and it's finding its identity. So whereas in the season that I was in the company between 1977 and 88, we were developing and beginning to do the larger ballets, this company does more ensemble work. And they're presently learning Valse Fantasy, They've been working with Darrell Grand Moultrie, who was born here in Harlem and is honored to work with an organization that he grew up watching. And they're reviving ballets that they began to do when the company first returned. So we're really excited about the possibilities. I think it's quite fascinating that Dance Theater of Harlem was created during the end of the Civil Rights Movement into the Black Power movement. And when the company came back, we just happened to be in Ferguson, Missouri when they were trying to figure out what was going to happen with the police officer who killed Michael Brown. So we found ourselves in the midst of a pivotal time during the Black Lives Matter movement. And so it's like, wow. And then Dance Theater of Harlem was in the Soviet Union, a part of perestroika, when the United Soviet Socialist Republic was being dismantled. And that was pretty exciting too, to go to the places where ballet really gained momentum and clarity and structure. And then Dance Theater of Harlem finds itself in South Africa with the dismantling of apartheid. Dance Theater of Harlem basically uprooted its operation and took it to South Africa. There were approximately 79 people that made that trip in intervals. There was a team that went out prior to the bulk of the dance company that did the outreach. They did classes in different places in South Africa, I think Soweto, Durban, and Johannesburg. I think they even did some outreach in Pretoria. They had classes in scenic design, arts management, costume design, music workshops. And one of the things that was fascinating about all the people that taught classes, in addition to them teaching movement classes, jazz, ballet, I think one of the company managers taught tap because he had been on Broadway, is that the dancers found that they learned so much from the young people that they taught, in addition to giving what they knew. So this is a very important American institution. It's a small gym in Harlem.